Okay, so we are live. All right. Okay, guys. Hi. Thank you very much for joining us here today. We are super excited with this webinar. So welcome to our Google Analytics for Reporting Simplified. Before we start, I would like to give you a little bit of time so people can join us. We have already some viewers. I have prepared, give me just a second, a small poll. If I'm right, you should see it at the side of your screen. So I'm interested to know if you already migrate to GA4 and if you already did it, or if you are working on it right now, or it's actually something you still need to start. So please let us know in the poll. So, all right, so let's kick off. I would like to move to the agenda. So today, first we'll have a small introduction. I will present you the webinar team. Then we will be discussing change. And we will also look at 4 key reports in GA4. We will talk about events, pages and screens, traffic acquisition, and e-commerce purchases. Then we will move to Swydo, and we will look how do we create a GA4 report. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session. So let's kick off. Let's go for our small introduction. So I am Adriana Luxbolda. I am Product Marketing Manager at Swydo, and I will be moderating the webinar today. We also have Daniel. Daniel, you want to give us a short introduction?
Hey everyone, I'm Dan. I work at a company called Measurelab, and I head up the analytics training, and I'm an analytics consultant. So I've been working with analytics for over 10 years now, and yeah, hopefully we get to talk about GA4 today.
Thank you. And Werner?
Hi everybody, I'm Werner. I'm also with Adriana at Swydo, and I'll be taking care of the final part of our webinar today, which entails how to actually display the GA4 data within a Swydo report.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So before we start, I would like to set up some house rules. So if you have any questions, so we have a private chat. You can type your questions there. We have 3 moderators today helping us, people from the team. So we have RT and Tiana and Andrea. They will be replying your questions directly. And we will also keep some questions for the last session, so for the Q&A. And if there are no questions that are answered during the webinar, we will also follow up afterwards. So please keep the conversation focused on the webinar. This is very important. If you have any different type of questions, if you have other topics you would like to get help with, just send us an email to support@swydo.com, and one of our customer support specialists will follow up. And please remember that we are recording the webinar. So if you cannot attend the whole session, or for some reason you miss an important part, so don't worry, we will send you an email afterwards and you will see the replay. So now let's get ready to kick off. So Daniel, embracing change. I will stop my presentation so you can start yours. Let me just leave.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly share my screen and just kind of introduce what embracing change actually means, because I think there's a lot of content out there that's always like, this is GA4, or this is the good things and the bad things, or comparing against Universal Analytics. So what I thought is take a slightly different approach to this and actually talking about why. Why is this happening? Why has Google released a new platform forcing us to move over, and ultimately forcing us to well, get rid of all of the other stuff that we've been using for the last, however many years. So what I want to do now is just kind of to understand where we're going. The first thing we need to do is go back in time. We just have to have a quick look at the kind of the journey that Google has been on when it comes to analytics and marketing, just so that we can understand the position of Google Analytics, what it's there to do, and why it's all changed. So if we go back in time and go back to the beginning, so Google actually bought a company called Urchin and rebranded that and released it as Google Analytics back in 2005. That was actually in place for a number of years, and then about 6 or 7 years later, Google came out with their paid version called Google Analytics Premium, and then they released what we probably know today as the kind of normal Google Analytics of Universal Analytics. A couple of years after that, they bought another company, which is a classic Googleism, and released something called Firebase Analytics. Now, this is their app analytics tracking solution. And then finally, they merged those two things together, the Firebase Analytics for apps and the Google Analytics for web, and they merged those two things together in what we now know is Google Analytics 4. And this is the timeline. This is how these products have evolved, and this is what's happened over the last, well, over 20 years since Urchin came about, 15 years since Google Analytics. But the more important thing than looking at these milestones or these kind of timelines of when these products came out is actually kind of what happened in between all of these. So, for example, when Google Analytics came out, the iPhone wasn't even out. The iPhone came out well after Google Analytics was released, which, as we all can, understand in hindsight, changed everything. It changed the way we consume media, changed the way we browse websites and we engage with brands. A couple of years later, and this is after the release of Universal Analytics now, this is when, if you remember, the acquisition of Instagram to Facebook and changing kind of that kind of social marketing game entirely and kind of expanding their marketing presence and their network. GDPR, our friend GDPR, came along after they introduced Firebase Analytics. So again, all these technologies were built before these kind of big seismic changes. And then, of course, our good old friend COVID-19 that came along just before Google Analytics 4 came out and rolled out into kind of the main production. What I'm highlighting here is that Google Analytics as a product has basically been kind of evolving pre-smartphone, the iPhone came out. And so what Google was kind of left with is this product that's been kind of like iterated and adapted since, actually back in the 90s, but it was actually designed for a different time. It was designed for a different experience. It was designed for websites of a different era and a different way of engaging them when people used to log in and have a session on a website, for example, let alone mobile applications. But let's have a quick look around going forwards now. So why have Google introduced Google Analytics 4? What are they trying to solve? Like, what's actually coming up in the future of which they're trying to put their kind of best foot forward and adapt to? So there's lots of things coming out. So you might have seen this kind of thing before. This is Apple's ATT they released last year or a couple of years ago. And this is now putting a big old blocker on tracking and marketing analytics on iOS applications. We've got things like the big rise of large language models, generative AI, and things like ChatGPT that's coming around. We've also got the continuously evolving aspect of privacy legislation, GDPR, the stuff that's happening in Brazil and the USA that are following suit. And so whether we can track, how do we gain consent and kind of ethical tracking in its coming up. But then also we've got things like the browser technologies are changing. So if anyone's come across things like ITP and ATP and these kind of things where Safari and Firefox and Brave all handle tracking and allow different things to happen in different perspectives and how that evolves over time. And finally, we've got things like, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but the final death of the cookie or the third-party cookie and how that's going to have a seismic impact on the marketing and analytics landscapes. So I think what I'm trying to do here is frame this idea of Google Analytics, or Google can perceive this happening. The whole marketing and analytics industry is kind of evolving and changing. There's all of this stuff to come. All of this stuff is either continually evolving or there's these big milestones that are coming. And so Google needed to create a product that can survive. Google needed to create a product that can adapt to the changes and be present and ultimately stay relevant, right? So everyone keeps using it. So let's have a look in the past. If we go back into the past when things were simpler, we had this idea where all the data that we were collecting was shared with third parties, and that was the primary source of truth. And thinking of that from a marketing perspective, for example, if we wanted to run a campaign in Facebook ads, what we'll do is we'll let Facebook track our entire website. All of that data will be sent to Facebook and we'll optimize our campaigns in Facebook. And now that's it. So that's all third-party data. We let them collect their data and we let them optimize to it, and we use that as a source of truth. Because ultimately, all user behavior and conversions were trackable. Everything that happened on my website was trackable. And ultimately what that meant is that we could measure things properly, or at least we can measure things accurately and reliably. So this is looking at understanding our marketing contribution, looking at attribution modeling. It was accurate and reliable. But now if we look in today's ecosystem, or even looking into the future, that's slightly shifted. At least now some data is shared with third parties, and it's not the primary source of truth. We may have even heard the idea of first party data kind of leading the charge with kind of the source of truth. And this is now saying that we can't send all the data to Facebook and we can't let Facebook decide on what they're optimizing to. Maybe we should be in control of that because we have a better sense of what's going on. Also now some user data is tracked or trackable. And I mean by that is things like consent management, putting a cookie banner up on a website or an application in things like iOS's ATT, for example. We can't track everything anymore, which I suppose is obvious now, but it used to be. And that ultimately means that marketing attribution, marketing measurement, and understanding the performance of our campaigns is no longer accurate and, more importantly, no longer reliable. And so this is the ecosystem that Google's evolving into. As a massive advertiser themselves, they're probably thinking like, how do we stay relevant? How do we keep people spending money with us? How do we keep people being able to measure their marketing effectively? Because what actually happens is the less data that is able to be collected means that we're measuring a lower ROI to our ad spend, which ultimately means we're less happy, less willing to invest with certain publishers, invest with certain ad platforms as advertisers. And this is a big thing that's impacted Facebook over the last couple of years. There was a report where they lost over $10 billion just from one change from Apple when they released ATT, for example. If you can't measure a return on investment, people are less likely to invest. And so this is kind of coming back to this idea of Google Analytics 4. Like, why am I talking about this? What the hell are you talking about, Dan? Like, how is all this relevant? And I think this ties back into this idea of how Google Analytics has, quote unquote, solved these problems. And I've just taken a quick excerpt from the announcement actually of Google Analytics 4 when that came out a couple of years ago. And if I just read that out for you, it's a privacy-centric by design. So if you can rely on analytics, even as industry changes, like restrictions on cookies and identifiers create gaps in your data. It has machine learning at its core and gives you the complete understanding of your customers across devices and platforms. And I think this is the key part here. And you're probably thinking like, so what? I just need my data, right? I just need to track my website, my app, or my marketing campaigns. But this is the big shift. And this isn't just a side-by-side comparison to Universal Analytics. This is a rethinking around how it does measurement. And there's two main aspects of what's changed here. One thing is the dependency on machine learning. And the second thing is the dependency on something called events. And now, in a sense, machine learning is kind of everywhere nowadays, and that's going to become more and more prevalent. But in Google Analytics 4, you'll see this everywhere, and we'll maybe even touch on a couple of these things in a moment. But the other thing you might think of, what do you mean events? And it sounds a bit mundane in comparison, but this is a huge part of them reinventing analytics, reinventing how they do measurement in Google Analytics 4. Because what is an event? Well, an event is everything. Absolutely everything in Google Analytics 4 is an event. It is the building blocks of this whole entire ecosystem. And so what we have is this idea of a user existing, and then a series of things are happening. A series of events are trackable against these users. So it doesn't matter if it's page views, it doesn't matter if it's purchases or app installs or iOS updates or session starts. It could be absolutely anything. Any action a user takes is trackable in Google Analytics 4. Whether it's online, on an app, on offline in a store, whether we're uploading contextual data, it almost is completely agnostic. Now, this is the important part here, is that Google Analytics 4 is an agnostic tool. It pulls in data from anywhere it can get it. It does some fancy, magic machine learning onto it, and ultimately preserves a level of reportability or measurement against our marketing campaigns. Now, this is just me spending 5 minutes talking about this. Obviously, there's way more to go through here, which unfortunately time doesn't allow. So what I've done is I've just given 3 takeaways. If I can give you Dan's top tips, my 3 big takeaways. First of all, everything in Google Analytics 4 is an event. What that means is there is no longer things like sessions and page views in GA4. It might sound a bit grand, me saying there's no longer page views and sessions in GA4, but that means everything's an event, including sessions and page views, which is the biggest and probably the hardest change. The second thing is no data is complete anymore. So don't expect to have a report of 100% of data. And even when we do have this data, some of it's modeled, which means it's, I don't want to say the word guessed or estimated, but it is a very fancy, impressive estimation from Google, what they're doing with their data. Basically, 100% accurate data is a thing of the past. And finally, my biggest thing, and people that know me probably are sick of me saying this, users aren't people. And this is the biggest thing I perceive in web analytics, full stop, is that we can't track people. We have no idea how many people did this on your website or came to the website in the last 7 days. We've got these metric of users, but that's a proxy. That's as close as we can get. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to kind of go over into Google Analytics 4, and I want to show you a couple of those reports, a couple of those core reports that I find possibly the most useful. But like I said, if there's anything to take away, it's just these 3 things. Everything's an event. Don't expect complete data, and we can't track people. So let's jump in, shall we? I've talked a lot about Google Analytics, or at least Google's kind of positioning with the product and how the idea of analytics and measurement has changed. Now let's go in and have a look at Google Analytics 4. So to do that, I have to log in. So let me go and share this tab. To do so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Google Merchandise Store. By the way, this is a publicly available demo account. It's a real life e-commerce website that exists, but Google provides us access to do our own reporting, and we can go and have a little play. And just if you've never been into Google Analytics 4 before, welcome. This is it. This is Google Analytics 4. And to the untrained eye, or to the first time viewer, it looks pretty similar. It looks kind of similar to Google Analytics Universal, or GA3 as we've kind of retroactively named it. So I'm going to go through a couple of reports for you. The first thing to note is that the interface that I'm in right now is very lean, and you may not see exactly what I'm seeing. We don't have time to go through it today, of course, but what this whole interface is, it's a completely customizable and configurable. So what you're seeing here may not be what you see on your own property. But what we should all have is a specific report called events. Now, I'm finding this under the lifecycle section under engagement, and this report here called events. And remember, rule number 1, everything's an event. Everything in GA4 is an event, including sessions and page views. If I scroll down in this report, this is, I suppose you can think of it as the closest thing we have to, right? This is seeing underneath the hood of Google Analytics 4 absolutely everything that we have available in Google Analytics. So for example, we have our event names. So these are the actions, the things that Google Analytics is tracking. We can get a count of them. We can see how many users logged them. And then we can ultimately see how many per user have been, well, the count of events per user. And now if you are tracking revenue, which this website is, you'll also be able to see a revenue figure, which I can imagine only exists on the purchase event here. The really interesting thing about this report is that it can do everything you ever want to do in Google Analytics 4 can be done from this one report. For example, on row 2 here, for example, this is my page view event. So if I wanted to see how many page views occurred, well, that's this number here. If I wanted to see what's the average page views per user, well, that's this number here. And I can look at the same report in the same way, but look at a different row. So if I look at, let's have a look at the session starts, for example, now. This is telling me how many sessions occurred on my website during this period of time that I've got selected. And this is the average sessions per user. Now, because everything's an event in Google Analytics 4, it means that we can do all of our reporting from the events reports. I can do a couple of things, and you might think, well, okay, well, I actually want to look at the page views and say, well, I just want to see the page views. I don't care about the other report, the other events. I just want to look at the page views. And so this is something that we can do in here. We can add a secondary dimension for page. We can filter for that event and just look at the page view events. And in a sense, we've kind of built a page view report from first principles. That's not what I'm going to do, because Google has done a little time-saving exercise for us. And this leads us into the second report that I want to show you, the second most useful report, which is this one here, which is called the pages and screens. Now, the pages and screens report, as it suggests, shows me the pages of the website and screens of your mobile application. Now, GA4 is an app plus web measurement tool, so you're going to very quickly get familiar with this double barrel naming convention, pages and screens. And if I scroll down, you'll see what I mean. Things like page path and screen class. So it doesn't matter if you've got an app only or a website only or both, we're all going to be getting used to those double barrel naming conventions. And now this is just a pre-filtration of that events report, but for the page view events. And so this is a really nice time-saving exercise to jump straight in to have a look and say, okay, well, what was the most popular page viewed on my website? And here we go. We've got the event count for the page view events. We've got the users, and we've got the event count per user. In this case, they've renamed it to views per user. Because we know we're looking at pages here, there's a couple of other things that Google can provide us, for example, including an idea of engagement time. But possibly my favorite part of the whole GA4 interface is this one tiny little drop down under the event count column. And now this is something that you'll see in almost all reports within Google Analytics 4. And I just wanted to, because I like it, I'm telling you, I just wanted to show you how useful it can be and how valuable it can be for you. Going back to this idea, everything's an event, which means everything is, because everything's an event, everything's available to be reported in every report in GA4. Now, this might seem kind of obvious, and you might think, well, why wouldn't it be? But for people like me that have come from many years of learning Universal Analytics, this is the biggest transition for me to make, is actually unlearning Universal Analytics. If you're new to Google Analytics 4, it's going to be a lot easier. It's objectively an easier tool to learn. Unlearning Universal Analytics is the hard part. What I mean by that is that we have all data available in all reports, and there's no longer this idea of having to remember what goes where. So if I show you why this is my favorite part of Google Analytics, is because I can add any event I want into this report. So for example, if I wanted to add in the event of click, for example, so this for me is going to be outbound link clicks. I know that because I'm familiar with the data. I can now see what pages drove the most clicks. Or I can switch that event out for something like page views. We've already got that metric already in there, but I'm just showing you I can add page views. I can even add things like sessions as well. I can find that event here and select session starts. And now, in a sense, we're looking at how many sessions started on these pages. I can, of course, do any event, including e-commerce ones like add shipping info, add payment info, and finally, of course, even things like purchases. Now, the purchases are probably going to all appear on the, or at least the majority of them are all going to appear on the order completed page. So maybe it's not a super useful report there. But ultimately, this is an opportunity to look at any data in any report. In this case, we're looking at it by page. So that's the first two reports. The first two reports are actually the same. They're actually pretty similar. It's the all events report and then the pages and screens, which is just a filtered version of that for the page view or screen view event. Now I'm going to change it up slightly, and for the third one, and the third report, or at least my sort of the third in the top four reports that I use in Google Analytics, has to be understanding my acquisition, understanding my marketing performance. Google Analytics is part of the Google marketing platform. Its primary focus is to measure its marketing campaigns. So if I go under the acquisition section this time and look at my traffic acquisition, this is going to show me a view of my marketing channels and their performance on the website over time. For anyone that's done this kind of stuff before, you might be familiar with this kind of stuff from Universal Analytics, or you might have even come across the term UTMs. If you're doing any kind of marketing, you're probably aware of UTMs and having to tag your campaigns with UTMs to be able to track it. And this is why. This is why we do all of that hard work as marketers, is so that we can pull that data out this side. So what I'm looking at here is the default session group. If I wanted to, I can switch that out and look at the source, medium, and campaign. Any of those lovely UTMs that you're putting in, you can pull out here. I'm just going to leave it as the default channel group for now, which is Google's kind of clever aggregation of all of that, all of the marketing channels. And then across the metrics here, I've got all sorts of numbers. I've got users, sessions. I've got this idea of engaged sessions, average engagement time per session, and all these other lovely things that Google has defaulted into this report. Now, small caveat, whatever Google's got in here, you can change. If you want to see bounce rate instead of engagement rate, of course you can add that in. That's no problem. It's not there by default. It doesn't mean you can't add it in yourself. But the most important thing here, again, is my favorite little drop down, which means I can measure anything against any event. And because I'm in the marketing channel report, because I'm in the traffic acquisition report, I can now measure my marketing to any event that occurs on my website. So for example, I could do this to purchases again. Let's add purchases in here and now see what marketing channel drove the most purchases. Okay, in this example, I can see that it's direct at the top of the report. But it doesn't always have to be big conversions. It can just be any type of action. For example, add payment information. So this is the number of times a user's made it through the checkout to the add payment information. Any action on your website or app can be tracked as an event. Any event is available in every report. And I think that's the key sort of part of this and the key change and the key difference between the previous versions of Google Analytics. Now, I'm going to move on to the last report now, because one of the other key aspects of measuring our marketing campaigns or measuring stuff in Google Analytics is the e-commerce side. And now you might not be an e-commerce website, so forgive me for not accommodating that. But most of the time when we're looking at purchases, for example, I'm looking at the add payment information here. But if I'm looking at purchases, which is awesome, I can see how many purchases occurred. And I'm going across the right-hand side, I can see how much revenue we made. But it's not answering a question, which is, well, what was purchased? What's the average order value or per product, or how can I see how many items were added to cart and abandoned? And so this is, and it leads into the final report that I want to go through. And this is under the monetization section, and we have our e-commerce purchases. Now, this e-commerce purchases is a report just like anything else, but it zooms straight in and looks at our items. And so the items are the new name for products, which Google Analytics 4 calls its e-commerce products. And so these items, we can see, for example, in this account, we can see how many times an item was viewed, how many times it was added to cart, and ultimately how many times it was purchased, and then the revenue that was generated from each of these products. I can cut this report by any dimension I want. I can cut this by marketing channel. I can cut it by device type. I don't have to look at it by item name. I can look at it by categories, by brands and IDs. If you're an e-commerce website, if you've used Universal Analytics and the enhanced e-commerce stuff before, this should feel relatively familiar. It's actually doing pretty much the same kind of thing. But it's the final report I wanted to show you. And these 4 reports can cover maybe 90% of all of your requirements when it comes to reporting within inside of Google Analytics platform. Of course, I've had to miss out a lot of other cool and interesting reports that you might be using just because of the time we have available. But I wanted to quickly show you my top 4 reports and just kind of set the scene a little bit with some top tips and some of the other stuff. So yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to leave it there. Obviously, we've got a Q&A at the end, so I'll take questions from everyone at the end. But I think I'll welcome the the Swydo guys back on stage. Thank you so much.
Now, thank you very much, Daniel. It was an amazing presentation, and I really love the time machine trip. And I think you're right about unlearning universal analytics, right? I think this is exactly what we as marketers need to do in order to get this transition right. So thank you very much for all the tips. And yeah, I think it's time to give the spotlight to Werner, who will now take us on an exciting journey of creating a report in Swydo. So yes, Werner, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Adriana, and thank you, Daniel. That was very insightful. After looking at that for the last 20 minutes, I really believe that I am going to do the easy part now. So if you can give me a second or two, then I'm just going to share my screen with you. So for this, I will make use of an empty client bucket. And before I get started, I firstly want to show you our standard GA4 template that we've got available for you for use at the moment already. Now, a lot of what was covered by Daniel is available within the standard GA4 template. So if I start by saying add a new report, I select the Google Analytics 4 template and I click on create report. This report will then be generated from our GA4 template. And let me quickly scroll through there. You can see there some of the acquisition data. Now, obviously, this is not displayed in exactly the same way that Daniel displayed it to you earlier. This can obviously be adjusted and modified to resemble everything that Daniel discussed with you earlier. Quickly, just going to scroll through this. Here's some of the e-commerce data. And then finally, we have our event count by event name data. Here's only by event count, but obviously you can add in whatever you want to add in. And that's what I want to do now, is I want to show you how we can firstly build these from scratch, or how we can add widgets that are already preset and look exactly the same way as the data would be displayed within Google Analytics 4. So this is for anyone maybe wanting to expand on the existing template, or that already has a GA4 report in place, but feel that the data that they're displaying at this moment in time is a bit inadequate, and we just want to give the report a little bit of body. So what I'm going to do for that is I am just going to start from scratch in a blank report, create a new report, create new blank report, and then let's get started. So the first thing, if I want to add anything within Swydo, I'm going to click on the blue plus sign, and then I have two primary options that I can select. I've got three secondary options. We won't be covering that today, but if we look at the two primary options that we've got available for us, it's KPI and widget. So let's start with the KPI. KPI is basically a single metric, single value, single data point. It would be like your engagement rate, your new users. That is what the KPI would be. Whereas your widget is everything containing multiple data points. That would include your charts, your tables, your graphs, all of that. Basically anything that has a dimension by which the data is broken down by. So let's start with adding the events data. What I'm going to do for the first example is I am going to build this whole widget from scratch to show you how easy it is for that to be accomplished. So if I click on widget, I select the data source where the data must be imported from. If I scroll all the way to the bottom and I select custom Google Analytics 4 reporting widget, I'll then go into the back end of the widget, so to speak. If I then select dimension and metrics, dimension is the first choice. In other words, what am I breaking this down by? So let's start with event name, and then we'll start adding some of the metrics that was, let's look at the metrics that Daniel had in his presentation. So let's add event count, total users, event count per user, and total revenue. Now, normally within a table, if we go to the presentation here and we want to display this as a table, it's already set up as table. Normally we have a limit to the amount of dimensions that is display of 10. Otherwise it could get quite big, but you can select anything between 1 and 100. So depending on how many you want to display, the choice is up to you, but it comes preset with 10. So in this case, because we added total revenue and we want to make sure that we see some data under total revenue, let's change this to 15. Then the last thing we're looking at is, what am I sorting this by? In other words, at the moment we have selected event count. That means that whichever event name has the highest event count, that will be displayed at the top of the list, and it will obviously follow suit down to the one that has the least amount of event counts. So if I save the settings here, there's the table with the data that was requested. Then if I, for example, only want to display one of the events, so let's say I only want to display the data for, let's say, scroll and page view. What I can do in that instance is I can simply add the filter for that by going to filter, add filter, filtering on the event name, and then adding scroll and page views, or page view. If I save that, it will only display the 2 event names that I selected in my filter. Then moving on to pages and screens. For this example, I'm not going to build it out from scratch. I'm going to show you how convenient it already is for you, because this is one of the preset widgets that we have got set up for you. So in this case, we'll once again add on the plus sign. We will select widget, select the data source where the data must be imported from, and then search for page title in the screen class performance. If I then save these settings as it is, we will see the data with all the metrics that was just shown to us by Daniel is already there for you as a preset widget. So this takes a lot of the headache away about what we see happen a lot with people. If we are, for example, using event name or screen title, what is the important metrics that need to come with this? This has been set up with the same display as you get within the Google Analytics 4 interface. So everything is already preset for you there. Then if we're moving on to the traffic acquisition, for example, once again with the traffic acquisition, I'm going to select the data source where it must be imported from. And if I scroll down, I will see there's already a table with traffic acquisition data there for me that has been preset just to select. So if I select the traffic acquisition, then there's all the data with the traffic acquisition coming in. Then the final one that we want to touch on quickly is the e-commerce. Now with e-commerce, I'm going to build this out from scratch again for us. So once again, I'll be clicking on the plus, selecting widget, selecting the data source where we want to import the data from, and then once again selecting custom Google Analytics 4 reporting widget. Go to dimensions and metrics, and let's say that we want to show some e-commerce data by item name, for example. So we will select item name as our dimension, and the metrics that we will be adding in there is items viewed, item add to cart, item purchases, total purchases, I beg your pardon, and then the revenue, the item revenue. We look at the sort by, so items viewed will be the primary sort. So if we save this, then there's the e-commerce data with regards to everything that we have selected in the widget. The last thing I want to touch on, that was sort of touched on by Daniel as well, is some metrics that might not be available for you in GA4, but that was available in GA3. And the example that he used was the engagement rate versus bounce rate, which was available in GA3. What we've got in Swydo, and what I'm sure that a lot of people, even people that have been using Swydo for a long time, are not aware of, and I can see a lot of clients don't make use of this, is our custom metric, which I find a really interesting thing to help you to not only manipulate data, but to create your own metrics if they are not available. So let's go and add a KPI in this case and look at the engagement rate. So now we've got the engagement rate, but we might be in the position where our clients are so used to looking at the data from bounce rate, and they say, I don't want to see the engagement rate, I want to see the bounce rate. So what we can do in that instance is go to metrics, select edit fields. I've already added this earlier, but I'm going to add this again to show you how this can be done. So what we can do then is say add custom field. Now we know that the bounce rate is the inverse of the engagement rate. So if we have the data available for engagement rate, we can simply apply the formula and calculate the bounce rate for ourselves. So what will happen here is, to invert this, we will have to add the formula, say 1 divide by the engagement rate close the bracket and multiply with 100. That will inverse the engagement rate, basically then giving you the value of the bounce rate. We can save the field and we can change this to display in percentage. So if we then close this, we will then find in our metrics, if we go and look for bounce rate, we will see under custom metric we have bounce rate. We will select the bounce rate. My apologies, that was the incorrect one I selected. We will then select the bounce rate for a second time. And there we go. That is the bounce rate, basically the inverse of what the engagement rate was. So it's not per se for this specific one, because bounce rate now is available for us to display anyway. This is just to make you aware that if there are certain things that you are lacking and you feel you can't find, you can always make use of our custom metric to find these and to help you set this up within your report itself. Yes, and then just to add to that as well is, even though I think we've explained it pretty nicely, but for a lot of you, the GA4 is still very new. If you've got issues, if you're a Swydo client and you still think that you might struggle to add this in, what you can always do is just send us a screenshot of the data that, as it appears within the GA4 interface, send it to us in support, and we will help add it for you into one of the reports. So yeah, that's all from my side for now. So yeah, Adriana, back to you.
Now, Werner, thank you very much. It was very insightful. I'm sure this will save lots of time and make the transition to GA4 easier. So I think it's now time to jump into our exciting Q&A session. We have been receiving some questions in the private chat. So let me just check 1 second, please. So Dan, I have first one for you. It says, what is the difference between session and first user?
Ooh, good question. Whoever asked that one. This is a biggie. So I demonstrated one acquisition report, which was the traffic acquisition report. But right next to it, there was another one called user acquisition. And this is a big change in GA4, where they've given us the choice of 2, whereas in Universal, they gave us the choice of 1. So the first thing to note with that, if you just want the same report that you had in Universal Analytics, that's traffic acquisition. And that's the one that I demonstrated earlier on in the webinar. Now, the difference between the 2 is our favorite subject as a marketers, which is attribution modeling. One of them is last click attribution. One of them is first click attribution. So traffic acquisition is all around, did my campaign drive a click that drove a session that drove a conversion? Yes or no? Like, how well did that do? Whereas the user acquisition is, did my campaign drive a new user to the site who then did something later on, potentially a day, week, even a year later, and converted? So I'm thinking it's a really, really valuable asset to have, to be able to use both of those reports in the right way. Traffic acquisition is the kind of, I would call it the business as usual report. If you're just looking for the same kind of reports that you've seen before, that's last click attribution, that's direct response measurement. But I'm really a huge fan of the first user, the user acquisition reports and the first user metrics, because it enables us to measure things like maybe like social and prospecting campaigns a bit more meaningfully, because it's all about user acquisition rather than traffic acquisition. Did we get new users in who converted rather than did we get the clicks?
Thank you very much. All right, so one more for you, Dan. It says, I don't see any purchases or revenue in GA4. How do I see that?
Oh, good question again. So if you're not seeing it, but you are in Universal Analytics, you need to continue on that GA4 migration journey. So GA4 is a brand spanking new tool compared to Universal Analytics. It's nothing to do with Universal Analytics. The only thing it has in common is the fact that it's called Google Analytics. So it's whoever's done the implementation, whoever's responsible for that needs to go in and do the implementation again. The implementation is very similar, but slightly different to the Universal Analytics enhanced e-commerce infrastructure. So if you've done all the hard work already with data layers and tag manager and all that wonderful stuff, if you're familiar with any of those terminologies, it should be relatively straightforward, but you need someone that's in the tech tagging up the new events, the new e-commerce events for GA4. It's not going to happen for you automatically, unfortunately.
All right, thank you very much. Werner, I do have a question related to Swydo. It says, how can we move clients from Universal Analytics to GA4?
Well, yeah, just basically to add on what Dan was just talking about now, is that what we must remember is it's got the same name, but it's a completely different thing. So even if we look at some of the metrics, they are tracked in similar ways, but they're not tracked exactly the same. So there's a couple of options that we've got here. You can either just in the same client bucket, just create a new GA4 template report by using our template and then adding some of the things that you find you want to expand on or add on. If you are looking for historical data, then it is also possible for you to, in the same report, have a GA4 data source along with your universal data source, where you can maybe be displaying some of the historic data in GA3 and the current data in GA4. So the idea that you can like for like copy what you had in the report in GA3 to GA4 is going to be very difficult. Most of it overlaps, but there is some of it that you won't be able to do. And just also one thing really to take note of is that it's not 100% comparing apples with apples. The data is not, as Dan said earlier, as accurate as it used to be. There's no 100% accurate data that you're going to get anymore. It is calculated, so just be aware of that, that if you are comparing historic data from GA3 with the new data from GA4, whilst it might look the same, it isn't 100% the same, but that is an option for you there. I think it's so minimal that you're not really going to pick up on the difference there. So that's unfortunately the only thing that there is to do, is to start a new report in the client bucket, or to maybe incorporate the two of them if you want to also display some of the historic data.
All right, thank you, Werner. You also mentioned historical data. I see a question here about what will happen to Universal Analytics historical data. Maybe Dan, you can explain a little bit there?
Yeah, for sure. So we're probably all, at least on this webinar, we're probably all aware that the 1st of July this year, coming up in a couple of weeks, is the sunset date for Universal Analytics. What that means is that Universal Analytics is going to stay there, but it's going to stop collecting new data. So in a sense, you still have Universal Analytics, it's just not going to have any new data coming into it. And that's going to last for a year. And so the 1st of July 2024 is when it's going to be turned down. And what that means, that's the polite way of saying it's going to switch it off and delete all your historical data. So from the 1st of July this year to the 1st of July next year, we have 12 months to actually go in and export the data that we want to keep from Universal Analytics. And that's going to be on our backs to do. Google is not going to do that for us. So there's no possible way of importing that data into GA4. It's a completely different interface. It's a completely different system. So you will have to export that to yourself, and you'll have a year to do it. So I would suggest just not worrying too much about it until at least the 2nd of July this year.
All right. Werner, did you have anything to add up there?
No, not really. I think most of that was covered in my previous answer, that if you still want to display some of the historic data and going forward, even towards the end of the year, that it is possible for you to, in the same report, it's in two different tables underneath each other, display the historical data in GA3 and then display the current data in GA4.
Great. Thank you very much. Then I see here a question regarding the difference between traffic versus user. Can you please explain more about it?
Yeah, that's actually the same kind of question as we just had, the first question, which is the traffic acquisition and user acquisition. So
okay, yes,
it's the attribution stuff.
All right. Keep going on the list. What are insights or data that were not available in Universal Analytics that are now available in GA4?
So what do we have new in GA4 that we didn't have in Universal? Okay, I think that there's a couple of big ones. I just want to be really quick with the answers here, but obviously let me know or get in touch via the email address if you want to go into any more detail. The first one is the modeling side, the machine learning modeling. And so this is just, I don't know if you want to call it an insight, but it's just able to kind of get your data more accurate. So for example, it can join users across devices and across cookies, which Universal Analytics never could. So hopefully it's going to neaten things up and start filling in some gaps that Universal Analytics had in terms of data quality. The second thing is the predictive modeling. Now, GA4 is built on machine learning. Another type of machine learning model is predictive modeling or forecasting. And so Google is always looking over time and predicting forward. So what it's doing is predicting numbers in your data. And if they go above or below that, they're an anomaly. And so it can do anomaly detection really well. And it pings you every time something interesting has either happened higher or lower. So I think these kind of forecasts and predictive models and predicting someone being able to purchase or churn is the real value add from a marketing and analytics perspective that GA4 brings that Universal Analytics never had.
Thank you very much. Werner, I see one question here related to Swydo. So what are easier ways to select widget options when you are creating the report?
Well, yeah, this is also a very broad question. It depends on how comfortable you are within Swydo. I would advise in general for you to start with one of the preset widgets, and then to basically fine tune and change the metrics in and out in the way that you wanted. All of the preset widgets that we have created resembles the data in the way that it is displayed within Google Analytics 4. So it's already going to look familiar for you in the way that these preset widgets are made. And if you're not 100% happy or you slightly want to modify it, it's very easy for you then just to go into the back end of the widget, so to speak, and change under dimensions and metrics, change maybe the metrics that you want to display. Or if you want to get more specific with a certain set of data, you can always then just go in and add a filter to that to make it specific to either an event or whatever it is that you want to filter on.
All right, thank you very much. Dan, one more for you. Where can you see the conversion rate and the other numbers we have in Universal Analytics?
Oh, that's a good question. So that's, as you probably may have noticed if you've been into GA4 or from what I was sharing, is there's some default numbers that Google Analytics 4 has differently to Universal Analytics. And I'm kind of a fan of that. I remember I'll caveat with everything I'm saying that they're all available. All of the old numbers are available. You just have to go add them in yourself. So they're all available. And I think that's where Swydo comes in. Like you can add whatever numbers you want and you can interchange them without having to rely on the defaults. But the way to do that is to go in and edit the reports. So numbers like pages per session, session duration, bounce rate, as you demonstrated, Werner, in your demonstration there. So all of those numbers are available. They're just behind the scenes, and you have to go bring them to the forefront yourself. And so, yeah, they are available. Everything you're familiar with is available, give or take some numbers. But you just have to go in and go and tweak the defaults yourself to go see them.
All right. Someone is asking us in the engagement section, why is total the revenue from traffic versus user acquisition so different? It happens to me.
Yeah, so that's another thing of the attribution stuff. So that's traffic acquisition and user acquisition again. So this is about attribution modeling. So every time you use a different attribution model, your revenue split per marketing channel is going to be different. So there's actually infinite ways you can cut the pie. You've got one pie, you can slice it in lots of different ways. And so first click attribution, which is traffic acquisition, last click attribution, which is traffic acquisition, first click attribution is the user acquisition, is just cutting that pie in slightly different ways. So you're going to see different numbers, but that's deliberate and very powerful and useful. It's just using it the right way. By the way, a little tip on that, if you wanted to go and see some other attribution models like data-driven attribution, another type of machine learning model, there's a whole section in Google Analytics on that left-hand side in that mega nav called advertising. And that is going into that subject in way more detail. And it's a really powerful asset for any marketer to use. So yeah, I'll let you explore that in your own time. But yeah, I would go in there and go find out more ways of cutting that pie.
Excellent. Thank you very much. A lot of questions. So we are keeping track of the time. For Dan, how does the real-time reporting compare to Universal Analytics? Can we also see data by hour, like in Universal Analytics, instead of just by day?
Yeah, so I will answer the second part first. So data by hour is available. It's just you have to add that in as a dimension. There's basically hour, date, hour. There's lots of different date and time dimensions, all of which will be available in Swydo too. So you can, of course, see it by hour. Hour's probably the most granular you can get to when it comes to things like Google Analytics, at least out of the box. And if you're doing your own analysis using data warehousing stuff connected to BigQuery, then you can go into the second and even the microsecond. It's interesting. But the first part of that, the real time, how does that compare? So GA4's got a slightly different spin on real time. Real time depends who you ask. It's not really real time. It's just a rolling 30-minute window of data. So real time in GA4 is just the rolling last 30 minutes. And just as a small print to that, there can be up to a 2 to 3 minute lag of data getting into the real time, and then it's in there for half an hour. So it's not really real time, but it's I don't know, it's the best we got.
Thank you very much, Werner. Here there is a question for you. What is the advantage of using Swydo reporting over GA4 reporting?
Well, there's a couple, so to speak. I would think the most obvious one would be that in Swydo you can pre-select only the data that you want to see. You wouldn't have to go, if you look in your Google Analytics interface on the left-hand side, I wouldn't have to go to traffic acquisition and then go to my e-commerce data. You can pre-select all the data that you want to see beforehand, compile that in a way that you want to compile it, in the same order that you want to compile it, and only the data that you want to see is going to be visible there for you to see. So obviously there's an enormous amount of data within Google Analytics, but if you go into a Swydo report, you can only display the relevant data in the same order that you want to display it. The other thing that is really nice is, obviously, even if you just monitoring what is happening to one of your clients, with Swydo, you can make use of a monitoring tool as well, where you'll be able to just track some of the important metrics every morning. But the other thing is, if you have created a GA4 template for all your clients, instantaneously, you've only got the relevant data for each client available if you go into the report. So you wouldn't have to needlessly go and click away to eventually, in each different client, get to the data that you want to look at. So that, yeah, off the cuff would be a massive advantage for you, and also be a massive time saver.
Thank you very much, Werner. Dan, there is one more for you. Should GA4 be used with Tag Manager? Are there advantages with or without Tag Manager?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can use it without and you can use it with. So my preference is to use Tag Manager. For me, it's not an easy yes, no, you should always use it with Tag Manager. It all goes back to whose responsibility is analytics, whose responsibility within the organization is it for the deployment, the management, basically the health of this data, the health of analytics. So if that sits within your team, let's say you're a marketing team or an analytics team or an analyst, then yes, use Tag Manager. It's so easy. You can deploy code instantly to your website for your marketing and analytics purposes, and you don't have to go through developers, IT teams, freelancers, or sprint cycles. However, if you're the IT team, if your responsibility is for the deployment, then they might prefer to use a tool they're more familiar with, and that's maybe the CMS and deploying it through the back end, in which case, for sure. So it's just preference really, and avoiding bottlenecks and dependencies on other people. I would say if you're like me, an analyst or a marketer, then use Tag Manager. It will save you time, I promise you, even if you do have to initially learn a little bit about Google Tag Manager to begin with.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Daniel. I think we have time for one more question. There is a good one here regarding bounce rate. Can you explain the difference between how the two platforms deal with bounce rate?
I would love to. It's one of my favorite conversations around Google Analytics. So this actually ties into something Werner was saying earlier around how there's when you migrate from Universal to GA4, there's some things that we have to just understand it's different. And the annoying thing that they've done is they've actually given it the same name. So for example, users are called users in GA3 and 4, and they're defined differently. The same thing with bounce rate. So bounce rate, there's a bounce rate in both platforms, but they're defined very differently. The thing about bounce rate in Universal Analytics, it only looked at one thing, which was number of page views in a session. So a single page session was a bounce session. And if you saw more than one page, it was an engaged session. That's very basic and is not inherently useful at that level. In GA4, they're still using page views per session, but they're also looking at engagement time and conversions. So it's basically layering in 3 different factors to identify a session bouncing or engaging. So there's more technical definition there. All I would say is that you're going to see a potentially lower bounce rate give or take. It depends is an answer in GA4, but I would say that bounce rate in universal analytics wasn't useful, and it wasn't doing maybe what you think it was doing. In GA4, it is useful, and bounce is bad. So in GA4, bounce is bad. In universal analytics, bounce didn't tell me anything. So that's my opinion, but I would happily have that conversation if you find me on LinkedIn, and I can go a bit deeper on that. It is a favorite of mine to have.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan and Werner, for your answers. I am leaving here the email address from our support team, so you can write us to support@swydo.com. In case that there are any questions that were not answered during the presentation, you can always email us and we will also follow up. So that's first thing. Now I think it's closing time, and look at the, yeah, we have 5 more minutes. So if you are hungry for more content, Measurelab has way more content to offer you. So I would like to show you or give you the stage, Dan, if you can explain a little bit more here.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been working with a couple of professional learning designers over the last couple of months to build out this 6-week GA4 training program, which we're really proud of. And it's a combination of self-paced learning, videos, content blogs, live sessions, masterclass workshops. There's lots in there, but what we believe is one of the best kind of ways to learn Google Analytics 4 with practical examples using your own data. So this is an opportunity to kind of work with myself, my colleagues, Measurelab, and some peers across different organizations over 6 weeks to really learn, absorb, and kind of put GA4 into practice. And we're offering a 10% off discount code with Swydo10 in caps. I think it's case sensitive, but remember the Swydo10, and there should be a link on the screen, or it will be in the email that we follow up with that goes off to the page. Look, there's loads of information on the page. I tried to put everything in there, but if there's any questions around it, there's an inquiry form or a chat window that basically comes straight through to me. So if you have any questions around the course or considering it, we've got a cohort kicking off in a couple of weeks. So if you wanted to get in before and over the sunset of Universal Analytics, now's the time. And maybe we can do a little sort of party over the midnight mark or something like that. But yeah, anyway, look, I'll stop kind of promoting it now, but it would be awesome if you could join. We offer you 10% off, and I'm really proud of the content and the course we put together.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dan. Yeah, so now I think that we have the tools, right, to go and create our GA4 report in minutes with Swydo. I'm also leaving a small link here, so I'm not sure. Of course, we have a lot of subscribers to this webinar. Some of them are customers, so the only thing you need to do is to go and log in into Swydo. But if you are just considering it, so you can also, I'm leaving you here a link where you can subscribe for the trial. We have a 14-day free trial, so you can sign up and try Swydo and see what it can do for you. Of course, you can benefit from the templates and all the reporting features, and of course, all the sharing and client management possibilities. So please try it out. And I think it's time for us to close. I'm taking a look at the timing. Yeah, I think we promised we will close before an hour, so I think we are perfectly on time. I want to thank our presenters. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Werner, for these amazing tips. I think I hope that it was very useful for all our viewers, that we enjoy it, we learn, and the most important, that we could enhance our reporting experience right after this webinar. Of course, as I say, if you still have questions, just send them to us and we will follow up personally. Thank you very much, and cheers. Happy reporting, eh?
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.